This is the Breakaway podcast presented by the National Bird Hunters Association. The NBHA's Breakaway podcast is brought to you by Purina Pro Plan, fine-tuned nutrition to promote strength and stamina in the canine athlete and longest-standing supporter of the sport of field trialing nationwide. You can fuel your champion with Purina Pro Plan using various physical and online retailers nationwide found wherever pet food is sold. Purina Pro Plan, fuel the champion within. Garmin, delivering innovative GPS-enabled technology across diverse markets, including sports and fitness, outdoor recreation, marine, automotive, and aviation. Garmin, engineered on the inside for life on the outside. Gundog Supply, the leader in training collars, tracking collars, and so much more. Fast, friendly service, great customer support, and the newest Gundog products on the market. Gundog Supply, we train our dogs with the products we sell. Mule brand clothing and apparel, outdoor clothing for all sorts of environments and conditions. From hunters in briars and wading creeks to forestry personnel, farmers, motorcycle riders, and utility workers, Mule is clothing for hunters, made by hunters for over 38 years. Find your Mule brand gear at www.okidogsupply.com. Gun Dog Central. Gun Dog Central is a centralized location for finding your next dog, whether it be a pointing dog, retriever, flusher, versatile breed, hound, or even terrier, you name it. Gundog Central is the place to find your next canine athlete. To find your next champion, visit them at www.gundogcentral.com. OnX Hunt, the #1 hunting GPS app. Join the millions of hunters who trust OnX Hunt to find more game, discover new access, and hunt smarter. OnX Hunt, know where you stand. And Park Cities Quail Coalition. Park Cities Quail Coalition is a nonprofit organization run 100% by volunteers who are passionate about sporting traditions and determined to make it available to future generations by working to sustain and restore huntable wild quail populations, to encourage and educate interested youth, and to celebrate the quail hunting heritage. Welcome to the Breakaway podcast presented by the National Bird Hunters Association, where we talk everything bird dogs and bird dog field trials with everyone from trainers, handlers, owners, breeders, professionals, amateurs, and everyone else in between. I am once again your host, Joe Hopkins, on this second episode of this podcast venture, and we are so glad that you could join us. But before we go any farther, everyone with the NBHA wants to extend our sincerest of thanks to you, the listener. To say that first episode was a success would be a gross understatement. The streaming numbers, the plays are far beyond what we anticipated, and the amount of outpouring of appreciation and support as a result of that first episode has, quite frankly, just been unbelievable. The amount of texts, phone calls, emails, private messages, they've just flooded our inboxes, and we could not be more appreciative of that support. If you haven't listened to that first episode, we conducted a listener-submitted Q&A session with NBHA President Mr. Ken Sauer, covering everything from how to get started in field trials to technical matters and everything else in between. And based on your response, it was a major success, and we highly encourage you to go back and listen to that episode or share it with someone you know who has an interest in bird dogs or field trials, especially that new field trial participant. This episode, though, we shift gears a little bit and talk to Outcast Kennels Pro and Trial Chairman Mr. James Kleve of Paris, Kentucky, to talk about the new NBHA Sharptail Championship held by the Chippewa Valley Grouse Dog Association at the Namakagon Barrens Wildlife Management Area in Danbury, Wisconsin on September 23rd. But before we get into it with James, as everyone is well aware of, the new field trial season is directly upon us. Many folks are on the prairies getting dogs ready. The late summer string of cover dog dates have begun up north, and if you're like me, your mornings are being spent on the ATV roading dogs while listening to your favorite podcasts. But regardless of where you're at or what you're doing with your dogs to prepare yourself for this field trial season, we want to make you aware of a few upcoming NBHA field trial dates. So opening the season will be the Nebraska Walking Classic on August 24th, hosted by the Kiapaha Bird Dog Club at the summer camp of Justin Crook, who will also be taking your entries, followed by the Boiling Springs Field Trial Club, who will be having a trial on September 16th at the Tony Bingham Farm in Lawndale, North Carolina, which is followed up by the Southwest Missouri Walking Field Trial Club's trial on September 22nd at the Robert E. Talbot Conservation Area near Mount Vernon, Missouri, at the same time as the aforementioned NBHA Sharptail Championship, in which we'll get into much further details here in the podcast. But that takes us up to September 30th, where the North Missouri Field Trial Association will be having a slew of stakes at the grounds of Kevin and Heather Western in Martinstown, Missouri. So that's just a few of the upcoming dates on the NBHA calendar, and if you're interested in any of those dates or any future dates, please visit our website at www.nbhadog.org and have a look at our interactive calendar for further details and contact information. Follow us on social media to keep up with all that, or keep an eye out in the next edition of The Field published by the UKC. So without further ado, let's welcome in Mr. James Kleve. I'm thrilled to be joined by Outcast Kennel Pro and NBHA Sharptail Championship trial chairman, Mr. James Kleve. James, what's going on, brother?
Hey, Joe. Appreciate you having me on the Breakaway. I think it's a great thing for the sport. I think it's going to be great for NBHA, and I look forward to seeing where you go with this in the future. It can only go up.
I think you're right, James. I do want to preface this conversation that your path and my path do cross very often. We see each other on the grounds. We see each other at the trials. We compete against each other. We've got a lot in common. But the one thing that we have in common that people might find really interesting is the fact that we both live in Kentucky. But there's one thing that I think people are going to find out real quick. Your accent is not like my accent. Care to explain?
Well, I'd like to say this is a born and bred Kentucky accent for all the Kentucky locals, but unfortunately, I just can't say that. I was born and raised in Minnesota and grew up on the Minnesota-Wisconsin border and bounced back and forth growing up, and my Kentucky start happened about 2018, so I'm still kind of relatively new and still a transplant in some people's eyes.
We're still working on your yawl. You've still not gotten that yawl down pat and that tongue roll, but you're getting there. Every day you get a little bit better. We claim you anyways, regardless of where you come from. But James, Outcast Kennels, you're a professional handler and trainer. Tell us a little bit about Outcast Kennels.
So I am one of those either lucky or unlucky few, depending on how you want to look at it, that I was pretty much born into the sport. I've spent my youth going to dog events and field trials. My father before me and still is a bird dog man and pro trainer. Back in like the 70s, he did everything from AKC horseback events. He did NAVDA events. But when I was young and coming along, his passion at that time was grouse trials. And so I got my start kind of more in the woods and busting brush and coming up that way.
If anybody does any research on you, they'll see a lot of content out there with you related to the cover dog trials. And when you came to Kentucky, I soon figured out that you were entrenched in that cover dog world, and that was kind of your basis. But that's not all that your field trial history or your involvement in the game spans. You have a pretty broad experience level into different trainers and different avenues like that. I think you've done some work in some other states with dogs and stuff like that. And this episode actually kind of was rushed a little bit. I don't want people to think we're going to have an episode maybe every week. We could, but you've got a trip coming up. You may be leaving in the next week to go work dogs up north, right?
Yep. One of the things that my father did when I was growing up was he'd send me out to the prairies with various people. So I'd have a, diverse background, get to hang out with different people. And it kind of got into my blood that, hey, you go on up and you go run on wild birds for a good chunk of the summer that you can. And I'll be heading up here shortly, run some dogs, kind of scout out the grounds a little bit for the Sharptail Championship. Every year the grounds change a little bit. We'll get back into that a little bit later in the podcast, I'm sure, on why. But then basically going to run the Sharptail Championship, scoot on down to the North Country Championship and the Wisconsin Cover Dog, and try to squeeze back down to Kentucky here for a trial, all in a very short window.
Well, excuse the pun, but you sound like you're getting ready to be busier than a bird dog. So that's a pretty tight schedule and a lot to get crammed in there. You've mentioned twice, and I want to touch on this here briefly. You've mentioned twice your father. How big of an influence has your father been through the course of your upbringing and now your professional career?
He's been a very big influence, but he's not wanted to be the only influence. He always wanted me to go on out, try different disciplines, different dog sports, hang out with different people, learn what to do, what not to do, trial and error. So he guided me in a sense, but he also wanted me to have my own freedom to figure it on out. And along the way, there's been some bumps and mistakes made, but that's necessary in life to figure out what path you want to go in on.
Well, my father was influential in my pathway too, and if it wasn't for him taking me out to the woods and just exposing me to that, I don't know where I'd be today. But the flip side to that is my dad looks back now and says, should I have really done that, because you're an addict and there's no going back. And a large part of my life, and sounds like your life, rotates around bird dogs and the field trial world and circuit. But you're field trial chair with the NBHA Sharptail Championship, which we're going to talk about here shortly. You've got a business, you're a professional handler and trainer, but you've also got an involvement with a club near and dear to my heart, the Bluegrass Walking Shooting Dog Club. Tell me a little bit about the Bluegrass Walking Shooting Dog Club.
So the second trial that I went down to for a NBHA event in Kentucky was the inaugural Bluegrass Walking Shooting Dog Club's first trial. And I got, I'll say, coerced into helping at that event. Little short maybe on manpower, being a first event and trying to get everyone wrangled. Right. So, I've tried to help out whenever and wherever I could on that club, as well as a couple of the other local clubs as well. And, walking in Kentucky just kind of continues to grow by leaps and bounds. And, it's really exciting to see where it's going to go.
And I'll chime in a little bit on that because I'm familiar with the history of that club. Friend of mine and a friend of a lot of our NBHA patrons, Jim Duncan, actually had a club called the Long Run Bird Dog Club. Jim passed away a few years ago, and there was a need saw to see that club picked up and continued. That was the task at the time of myself and Mr. Brian French of Georgetown, Kentucky. We kind of lifted it up, gave it a little bit of a facelift and got it going again, and helped build it to what it was today. And it's still going, a slate of stakes. You guys are going to host a slew of trials here in Kentucky this year, right?
We are planning on having 5 NBHA walking trials at Berea. We got another NBHA trial coming in on West Kentucky with the Krauses at the Kraus Farm. So we definitely are going to have a pretty busy fall, winter, and early spring.
Well, the field trial season is upon us, and everybody has a tendency to get amped up and cram a lot into a little bit of time here in August and September as we kind of anticipate the first trials wherever we go to. And logistically, you've got a lot of pieces to move, sound like. But before we go any farther, I think some congratulations are in order, because you yourself won runner-up Open Derby Handler of the Year this year. And I'll say this about you, James. When you came to that first trial, I see a lot of people that come to their first trials and they try to stay back or stay in the shadows and not get in the way and, not draw attention to themselves. They're a little timid. They don't know what to do. But you got in there, and granted, you had a trial background, you know how they work for the most part. You got in there and got your hands dirty. You knew that help was needed here or there, or you could lend a hand here and do that, and you didn't wait back for somebody to ask you or to see what you could or couldn't do. You just jumped in and said, "Hey, what can I do?" And that's kind of promulgated itself into a relationship with the Bluegrass Walking Shooting Dog Club, into the KFTA, into the NBHA, and now this rather robust and unique venture into what is being dubbed the NBHA Sharptail Championship, also known as our Eastern Regional Championship. And what I want to talk about is the inception of this idea, because granted, the NBHA runs a lot of field trials, but this particular trial, this particular venue, these particular birds, all of this seemingly is new territory for the NBHA. What gave you, and the powers that be or the people connected to you, what gave you this idea, and when did it come to you?
Well, I wish I could say that it was my idea to have a walking event on these grounds, but that's actually not the case. These grounds are very deep with field trial history. Even going back to the 1920s, the Northern States Amateur Field Trial Association was holding trials at a grounds just up the road from the Namakagon Barrens at Solon Springs. And Solon Springs has been a very historic grounds, hosted many championships. And then one of the championships that was held there was the North Country Championship, and that was being ran as a single course planted bird event. A little over a decade ago, a little bit of shift in who was running that event happened, and they brought that down to the Barrens and made it a multiple course wild bird event. So for a good part of a solid decade, the North Country was a staple at the Barrens as a walking championship. A few years back, for various reasons, it got moved into the Grouse Woods to run in conjunction with the Wisconsin Cover Dog Championship. And I've always loved the grounds. They are one of the most unique grounds that you can visit. And I felt that we absolutely had to get a walking event, preferably a championship, back on the Barrens. The Northwest Field Association had continued to run the Region 19 championships there, as well as a couple other clubs, and we had a date still from the walking event. So while I'd like to say, hey, this was a original idea on my part, it very much was not. It was more to revive something that we had lost.
So this was a multifaceted excursion here. Not only was this a gem of a trial and a gem of a place to have a trial, this was a date that needed to stay in capable hands to make sure that it went on and quality was upheld going forward. And that's where you, I guess, started to put the NBHA together with this venue in this trial, right?
I did have a lot of conversations with Ken Sauer and Greg Blair about trying to bring a walking event to these grounds because they are a hidden jewel. And we tried for a good year on discussions on trying to come up with various ways to bring something to it. And then Ken had a wonderful idea on taking and transforming the Eastern into the Sharptail Championship. And we were able to jumpstart it very quickly that way. And we very much hit the ground with our feet moving and running as fast as we could.
What kind of steps did you have to go through to present this? Because this isn't just a decision the NBHA makes and decides, hey, yeah, we'd like to do this, let's do this. There's obviously a governing body or an umbrella above our head, and that was the American Field, which is now owned by the UKC. Were you a part of that process, presenting this to the UKC? And if you were, how was it accepted?
As far as the UKC and American Field side, Ken Sauer did a lot of work on that. I did more of the boots on the ground work, talked to the local clubs, not just the host club that we use, but also the other clubs that use the ground, and then communicated to NBHA. And Ken and Greg definitely talked to some of the higher ups, talked to the board, had to go to the NBHA meeting last year in St. Louis and get it voted on. Thankfully, everything went smooth, as has most things for this trial gone smooth.
And I remember at that meeting in St. Louis, you ran me down and said, "Hey, we've got this idea. What do you think about this?" And literally, I was floored, because not only was it a good idea, I was a little perturbed that I didn't come up with that idea, because I had a dog on the open circuit, in the cover dog circuit up there, that actually ran in that championship. And after he ran, the handler called me and said, "Hey, look, you're in this thing. Like, you right now, you've probably got a piece of this thing, but hold on, we've still got another day to go." And then the wheels start turning. Oh wow, that's awesome. Like, what if I get a piece of this? How great would that be? And you start to go down the rabbit hole of learning about that trial. And as luck would have it, and as how my story goes, mostly in my field trial career, I got knocked off the last day, so to speak. But in the process of going down that learning rabbit hole, this trial and these grounds and these birds especially, they have such a prestigious place in the history of field trials. And I want to tap on that a little bit here with this next question. How special is this for the NBHA? I mean, about the NBHA and its history to a certain degree, and about that rich history up north in these barons and the trials and the dogs and the handlers that have been there all the years. Why is this so special to the NBHA?
It is a set of grounds that has been a part of field trial history for decades. It was in the area where, when a lot of the professional trainers would come off the Canadian prairies, it would be the first trial they would hit. A lot of them coming off of the rail car and transporting them by train, and the clubhouses and the history that goes along with it. And anytime you can get a organization like NBHA to touch that and help it grow in an organic matter, that it only helps NBHA. It helps the sport. And walking events are some of the fastest growing field trial events there are. And so to keep this going very much puts a feather in the cap of NBHA in supporting wild bird events.
Yeah, I totally agree. And it's just such a good opportunity to diversify. In our meetings, we kept talking about the opportunity to diversify here and to reach a new segment of people, to cross pollinate with cover dog individuals, and in that segment of the field trial world. And this is the front lines of where that actually happens, because you get a lot of cover dog people that entered in the first year's running, and a lot of the the standard NBHA walking segment also, and they mix really well here at these grounds. But we've talked about the inception of this idea and how it came about, the people involved, and your work and everybody else's work. Let's talk about the bird itself, because look, you're talking to a Kentucky boy here. Not a lot of sharptail in Laurel County, Kentucky. Don't really see a lot of really birds anywhere in Laurel County anymore, but sure as heck don't know nothing about a sharptail. James, tell me about the bird and why the bird is so special to this trial.
Well, sharptail are a very special bird, at least to me, and I think to a lot of others. Some have them nicknamed as the firebird. They thrive with having prescribed fires, and part of their decline is a loss of habitat. And a big reason the loss of habitat is wildfire prevention. So the decline in those numbers is making that bird even more special and even more rare. They're a phenomenal bird for running dogs on. Northern parts of the states and southern Canada are where you will see the vast majority of the sharptail population. Wisconsin used to have a very strong sharptail population, but what has happened is the grounds have become fragmented. And so as those grounds have become fragmented and isolated, it has very much hurt the gene pool. And so including the loss of grounds with that, it's just made it a bird you don't see everywhere. you'll see a lot of YouTube videos and Facebook videos of pros out on the prairies. And guess what? They're running on Sharptail. It's a covey bird. They're great birds for young dogs, old dogs. But a lot of locals will tell you that the birds at the Sharptail at the Barrens are a little bit different. They just seem like they handle a little different. They're just something else.
I had a person tell me, James, that he echoed that same sentiment about the birds and how they act at the Barrens. He said, these are Sharptail, but these are Sharptail that know they're being showcased in a field trial, and they don't play fair all the time. They do different things, and they show out a little bit differently. And we've got the greatest collection on our Facebook page of some live video that Greg grabbed at the trial of just multi-bird flushes and covey finds, find after find. And those dogs were really able to show themselves really well. But the thing that I remember or know about Sharptail and watching them, the various hunting shows and talking to people and all that, is they're a dancing grouse species. They have a very unique and very odd display they do, I guess, during their breeding season there on these hills or these humps on the terrain called Lex. I've always been fascinated by that because it's a production, isn't it?
Prairie chicken and Sharptail both use dancing grounds, and you are correct in that they are called Lex. It is something else to watch. At the Barrens, they actually have a ability to reserve a blind, and you can sneak in before first light and watch these dancing grounds as the male Sharptail go on out and put on this display where they spread their wings, they kind of lower their head, and it just almost looks like they hover around because their feet are going up and down so fast.
Really cool.
If you ever have an opportunity once in your life to go witness it, it is something else.
I couldn't believe the amount of people that actually just go and do that, and they drive long distances and they set up and they take great photographs and video of this ancient ritual that these birds do, and it really just sets them apart, from our other species and stuff, and really special. You talked earlier though, James, about the fire and the controlled burns and stuff that go on and how they're crucial for these birds in their habitat. And that's going to lead us into this discussion about the Namakagon Barrens. Now, I need to get something straight. Kentucky boy here once again. Give me the proper pronunciation of the Baron's name. Is it Namakagon or is it Namekagon?
Namakagon.
Namakagon. That was my first go-to. It was the smarter sounding one, but you're always just a little bit leery to poke into other verbiage and dialect that's not close to home. And I said to myself, I need to get that fleshed out before we start the podcast, or I will look like a big dork to a lot of people, because we've learned that a lot of people listen to this and they're going to poke fun at me. I'll probably be called the Namekagon guy from here on out, and that's fine. I'll live with that. But to say this is a special ecosystem would be an understatement, right? This is super, super, super special ground. Tell me a little bit about these grounds and why they're so special.
So Nancy is the property manager at the Namakagon Barrens, and she has done a wonderful job since she took over. Part of what she has is what she describes as burn units, and she has them divvied out into, I believe it's about 30 burn units. The grounds in total are about 6,400 acres. There is a north unit and a south unit. The north unit is where the vast majority of the acreage is at. And Nancy does a rotational burning about every 5, 7, 8 years is her goal. It is very, very intense to see a burn happen. It is very controlled. They have a well-trained crew, well-seasoned crew. Fire breaks are put in everywhere. And it takes a lot of time with that much acreage to put in the fire breaks, get the crews in, and it is definitely something that a lot of states won't put in the time and effort to do. And in Wisconsin, we're very lucky that we have them to do that. In addition to, we have a bunch of other field trial grounds in Wisconsin. We might not be thought of as, a capital state for field trials, but we are very lucky that we have numerous other field trial grounds that are well taken care of.
And the ad for this trial, it states that it is out of Danbury, Wisconsin, which is in the northwestern part of the state. And like you said, it spans across 2 units. And the research that I did, it's just shy of 6,500 acres, a massive, massive piece of ground, and it spans across 2 counties there. But the ecosystem there, and specifically the plant life there, is what makes this the really rare thing that it is. And from what I understand, James, it's pine oak barrens, and they're scrubby. It can be tough in places. It's not these big gigantic oaks, but we're talking the short stuff, the short scrubby stuff. Now, that sounds like to me, especially to a dog, that would be really rough going, really rough running, hard on the dog's feet, hard on you, the hunter or the trialer, and the horses too. Tell me a little bit about that terrain and how that works with that cover type.
So the Barrens are part of the Northwest Sands, is what the group is called, that encompasses far southwest to northeast of the Barrens by miles upon miles. And it is not the only ecosystem in that area, but it is the most intensely managed. What most of the locals will call it is the scrub oak. And it is definitely a challenge on a dog, between the sand and pads getting torn up, and then with the sand radiating heat in the middle part of the day. It's a grounds that definitely challenges all those involved. It requires hard on the part of the dog to have that desire to keep on going. It takes intelligence and brains to navigate the ground, stay with the handler, and stay mentally composed in the search of birds, staying connected with the handler, and putting the whole performance together.
Is it an ocean of this type cover where it's just endless, from horizon to horizon? There's scrub oak. It just seems like it would be a little bit of a challenge for a dog to decide, what kind of cast it's going to make and what it's going to go check out if there's no quote unquote objectives like that glowing field strip, or that cover line, or the obvious clump of cover to go check for birds. Is this just kind of a blanket of this cover?
If you show up for the first time, you might feel it's that way. You might be overwhelmed by the vastness of it. But as you get to settle in and you see the grounds, you see topography changes, you see little draws, you see natural edges that you don't think of naturally and instinctively. You see the little blue stem kind of mesh into the scrub oak. You see various things where there used to be food plots back in the day. Part of the ground's topography and terrain is also dictated by the fact that these are tax delinquent grounds from the Depression and before. So you will see old driveway trails that you wouldn't really think to look on.
Wow.
And there's such a history there where you can see little low depressions that hold water and bowls and little valleys. So it definitely opens itself up to likely objectives, and not just a big, vast, open blanket of space. But it does feel maybe a little overwhelming to those the first time they're there to be able to see that. A lot of people show up and you could drop them anywhere on the grounds and they can't quite tell you where they're at the first go around. But you show up a few times, you get to learn the grounds. You can definitely navigate around and know where you're at, because you can tell, and there are different objectives and lines and edges that just aren't what you think of naturally.
That's interesting. Now, is this area, is it a lot like other precisely managed wildlife management areas? It can't be only good for sharptails, right? I mean, if we come to the grounds and we spend a couple days running, are we going to see other wildlife there? Like, I'd imagine that this kind of micro-managed habitat has a lot of diversity when it comes to flora and fauna. I mean, just all kinds of animals. Is that right?
You will at least see signs of a lot of other species. You will definitely see a small amount of other species. You will see signs and tracks from various mammals. You'll see songbirds from sandpipers and all the way up to the pollinators and monarchs. It is a very diverse and well-rounded management area.
Yeah, and we have to preface that by saying when a whole herd of people on horses and on foot with dogs running around like nuts come, it does diminish your chances of seeing other wildlife like deer and stuff like that, because it is much of a parade that comes through once a brace of dogs and handlers and the gallery and the judges and everybody else comes through there. But I just imagine that this is a pretty diverse landscape, and all the research that I did kind of showed that, and I was just amazed that when you do that kind of specific management and you allow the landscape to naturally take care of itself and recycle itself and help it along, it's just amazing how it blooms, not only with the things that grow natively, but the animals that depend on that cover type and that landscape. But we're talking about this like this is a new venture, and for the most part, it is. This is a relatively new trial, but we did run this trial last year, right, James? And we crowned a champion and a runner-up. Tell us who won the trial last year.
Well, last year we drew just under 50 dogs for the championship, and we were able to name a runner-up and champion. And I know that the judges had to do a little bit of talking because they had a handful of performances that they were able to look at. But runner-up champion went to Ian McTavish with Cold Creek Belle, setter female. Laid out a nice, classy race, several finds. The champion was Grouse Trail's Warrior Cat, handled by John McKellop. I believe Warrior Cat is owned by his daughter and wife.
Oh, cool.
And Warrior Cat did a phenomenal job, sat in front, found birds, showed when she needed to, did not require much handling. You could definitely see the connection that John and Warrior Cat had. I know that they probably want to try to repeat that again, but I think this year is going to probably be even more competitive.
You have a tendency to get that repeat business once you have somebody get a piece of that trial or championship. I'm sure both of those guys will be there, and that's a good recollection of what you saw there. I kept getting videos and pictures from Greg and all the different people that were there at the trial, and it was amazing, like find after find after find, multiples, these covey rises and all this stuff. And I kept thinking, holy smokes, the judges are just going to have their hands full, absolutely with their hands full. But ultimately, that's what it comes down to, is a decision, whether you agree with it or not. That's what the judges liked, and that's what they saw. But I'll touch back on a point we talked about a second ago, James. I don't know about Mr. McTavish, but I'm pretty sure Mr. McKellop is a grouse guy, right? He's a cover dog guy by nature.
Both of them have participated in grouse trials, John more so. But these grounds are a melting pot. We had dogs that came from the grouse trials, dogs that have been on the NBHA circuit, dogs that are horseback shooting dogs. There were dogs that ended up just a couple weeks later running in the Region 19 All-Age Championship that was held on the same grounds just a couple weeks later. So it is a really good centralized location to be able to see what you have. The good dog is going to rise to the top, and it is an equalizer kind of grounds where everyone can show what they have.
That's awesome. So now let's get to the nuts and bolts here. We've kind of danced around this question. let's hear the goods here. Let's give the listeners the goods. I've got a dog, or I've got some dogs. I'm hearing this. I'm seeing the grounds. I'm liking the thought of coming and competing in this. And inevitably, when you go to trials, there's some scuttle or talk about specific trials or specific grounds and venues as to what kind of a dog does it take to win at this trial or these grounds. If you had to tell somebody in a roundabout way, James, what kind of dog does it take to be successful at the NBHA Sharptail Championship?
It takes a dog that has the sense to go find birds, stay with the handler, be able to buck the cover for an hour and continue going forward, be classy doing so, and like I say, find and handle wild birds. Um, if your dog has been brought up in edge country, they're going to see natural edges that, you know, will lend it to themselves. If they've been a prairie dog, they can work it like a prairie, being able to sit in front of you, show, handle, work the cover. They can adapt. It's really a set of grounds where it's hard to be prepared for. It is something that you kind of have to go into and be prepared for the unexpected.
This trial's in September, so it's next month, hence the expedience of this episode to get it out. What kind of weather can we expect, or can patrons expect, participants expect there that time of year in that part of the country?
That is very difficult to answer. We can experience just about anything at that time of the year. We're a little early for snow, I will say.
Oh, good.
Uh,
That's the only
for-
thing. We can stop right there. It doesn't matter. As long as it's not going to snow, I'm good.
no, you wait a few weeks, and there has been snow on those grounds during some trials, but more middle to later October time. So it can definitely be a little warm at times, but it can also be wet and rainy. It's a very difficult set of grounds to predict, especially this far out.
The age-old response of, if you don't like the weather, wait 15 minutes and it'll change. I love how every region of the country claims that as their own moniker, but it's very true. This time of year, it's transitional. You know, you're going to have a good set of rain gear, a good set of boots. You could run into the heat. You said earlier that sand does have a tendency to radiate heat off the ground and kind of turn that lower 2 to 3 feet into a pretty decent thermal zone there. So it's expect everything, I guess, is the answer. In order to have a trial, though, James, you got to have a pretty good set of judges, especially like this. So have you got judges? And if you do you mind to introduce them?
Well, we had a good set of judges last year, and I was lucky enough to be able to get one of them to return. Mary Sue Schulk is coming back this year, and I got lucky enough that she was able to help me convince her father, Mike Kraus, to come on up and judge. Uh, both of these two are no strangers to these grounds. In addition to judging it last year, they both judged Region 19 Shooting Dog Championship together a few years ago. So they both have experience on these grounds, both have experience with bird dogs. Mike has a history in bird dogs that goes back, I'm not trying to date Mr. Mike, but longer than you and I have been around, Joe.
That's
So
right. That's
that
right.
being said, I think everyone should be pretty happy with what we got. I know I'm proud and honored that we were able to get these two to come on up and look over the fine dogs that we're going to draw.
Mike and Mary Sue Kraus, the father-daughter duo of Kraus Kennels in Dixon, Kentucky, mutual friends of ours, great friends of mine, been great friends, and just lending hands and offering advice and everything. And me and Mary Sue talk very often, and every time that she left the grounds there, especially after the last year's NBHA Sharptail Championship, you would think you were talking to a 9-year-old girl who has just left Disney World. I mean, she had just had the time of her life, and you'd have thought she had won the trial, but she was the judge. And just talking about the bird work and the dogs and the people and how everything just set up so beautifully. And and how she was dying to get back there and do it again. So I don't think the sales pitch had to be too rich to get Miss Mary Sue back, but her bringing her dad is just another cool fold to this year's rendition, and should be well looked upon to have those two with the judicial duties and the judicial saddles there. But James, let's talk about a little bit about the legal side or the protocol side of this. How does someone qualify to enter for this trial?
Well, so this year we added a open puppy stake. So in addition to the championship, we're going to have a open puppy and an open derby stake. Uh, for those, there is no qualification needed. All you need to do is enter your dog through the Hunt Secretary program that we use for taking entries. As far as the open championship, what is required is either having a open derby or open shooting dog placement in a recognized American field trial.
Gotcha. And we talked a little bit about that in our Q&A session on the last podcast with our president, Ken Sauer. And one thing I stressed on there, and I want to stress again, if you are not sure, or if you are unaware, or you are totally oblivious to what qualifies or what does not qualify a dog in a championship like this or others, do not be afraid of contacting the powers that be. Get on the NBHA's website, www.nbhadog.org. Look up your national officers, look up your state directors. Go to James Kleve's website, Outcast Kennels. Go to Facebook and find the Bluegrass Walking Shooting Dog Club, or go to the NBHA's Facebook page. Reach out to someone and have them lay it out in the most understandable terms possible to find out if you do qualify, and if you don't, how do I qualify in the future? Because you had around 50 entries last year, James, and we're expecting, growth year on year given the circumstance of walking trials as a whole, and we want to make sure people do understand how they can qualify and what they need to do. But another question that we had in our Q&A that I'm going to relay into this interview with you is, can anyone come and spectate at this event? Is it open to anybody? State and federally owned and managed grounds can sometimes be finicky about how you come and what you ride, and if you can walk, and can you have horses and ATVs and stuff. Can anybody come and spectate this event? And if they do, how can they do that?
So we are not allowed to have motorized vehicles out on the courses, and it wouldn't very well work either with the way the grounds are set up. There wouldn't be a clear path to get through. So what we have is a road gallery that will drive the dog wagon and horse wagon along the road, and you can see a little bit from that. But we do have a good sized gallery that will be on a mix of both horseback and foot. The grounds are, some would say, relatively easy to walk. Others would say moderate to walk. Some were saying that from the road gallery, they actually had more visual than they expected to see. So for the vast majority, spectators are very well able to see a lot of action that is able to be seen with the type of cover.
And that makes it so much more enjoyable for those people that do come just to watch, or those people that come with people that are participating and they want to spectate during the event. But it sounds like a good piece of advice is a really good pair of boots. If you're going to walk, you need a good pair of boots, and you expect to walk. It's not going to be like walking on a sidewalk or on a golf course. It's going to take some effort. And there's a wagon there, which is a great option for anybody, young people, old people. Doesn't matter if you've got a handicap. Hop on the wagon and take a ride so you can see, and it probably elevates you a little bit too, to where you can see it. And the other advice that I would give if you're going to bring horses is get those horses shod before you come up there and make sure their feet are in good shape. You're not going to tear their feet up, but they will be put to the test a little bit, and you just want to make sure that horse is ready to handle those grounds. But James, we're kind of feathering ourselves into the end of this, and I wanted to ask you two things. And the first thing I wanted to ask you was, just talk about, forget the NBHA and forget about all the acronyms. How important are wild bird trials in general to the field trial community?
At the heart of the field trial community, field trials were very much born from wild bird trials. It is where everything kind of evolves from. And we need to make sure we keep that base as strong as we can. We have a lot of areas, Kentucky's one of them, where a wild bird population is just not there. And being able to hold a wild bird event is just not feasible. So anything we can do to keep the realism and the wild bird trials there, we need to support. At the heart of it, it is a dying event with wild bird trials. The only walking event on wild birds outside of the grouse woods is been the North Country for many years, and now the NBHA Sharptail. There has been a addition of a couple of half-hour stakes out west, but they've not achieved a championship status yet. So being able to hang your hat on winning a wild bird championship is something that I think everyone should strive to do.
And wild birds is essentially the test, the foundational portion of the test that we put our dogs through. I mean, it's like you said, field trials originated on wild birds, and there's really no better test of a dog and its acumen, its genetics, its training, its handler, and all the things that have folded that dog into what it's in. There's no better test than wild birds. Yes, over the course of history, we've had to supplement our trials with liberated birds and pen-raised birds, but at the heart of all this, we would all really like to get back to wild bird trials, but as our landscape changes, many things complicate our native bird numbers across our country. So that just adds another unique and very special aura about this trial and all of these trials in general. If you want to talk about the cover dog trials up north, run on wild birds, woodcock and ruffed grouse, trials that are held on wild birds down south in the piney woods on bobwhites and all the other bird species across North America. It's important that we not only continue these if we can, but to put back and to foster these environments and these grounds so that we'll have these birds for future generations and support those organizations that do countless hours of work to try to help improve habitat and to promote the sport, not only to this generation, but to generations to come. Now, James, you're fully entrenched into the field trial world. You're a stout member of the NBHA. Talk about the future of field trials, the NBHA, and the sport itself. Where do you see us? Where do you see us now, and where do you see us going years down the road?
I think walking trials are going to become if they're not already, most popular field trial there is. The horseback game is a tougher game to get into. It is not for everyone to go buy a gooseneck trailer, a 1-ton truck, and load it up with 3 horses.
Agreed.
The the walking game is something that everyone can get involved into, and it is going to continue to grow. And I think as NBHA continues to push the NBHA Sharptail Championship and other events and venues, it's only going to get better and get bigger. I know the NBHA numbers every year are growing by a good percentage, and I don't see that slowing down anytime soon. That being said, I absolutely want to see the horseback trials continue and stay
Yes.
strong. But I think the heart of the game is going to shift a little bit.
And the numbers are kind of showing that, but the thing about the field trial world and the field trial community, it's an organism, and there's different parts and pieces of this organism that work together. And I'll just use myself in as example, and there's countless other people that can testify to this same plane. The NBHA is where I stuck my toes into the water of handling my own dogs in competition. And once I found out that I liked that, enjoyed that, the next thing you want to do is you just want more. And, there's so many NBHA trials, both locally and nationally, but you're trying to find a way to scratch that itch even more. And that leads into other avenues and different segments of the sport. And I started out with a dog and a dog box and a pickup truck, and now I'm not only competing in NBHA walking trials as competitively as I possibly can. I'm dragging 2 Tennessee walking horses around everywhere I go and 5 setters, and I'm running in horseback trials too. And it's undoubtedly true that the NBHA and the walking trials help foster that participation for me in it. And I think it's important that you just compete somewhere. If you have a love for pointing dogs and you love competition, go to a field trial, compete in a field trial, forget about being competitive or whether or not you're going to win. Go to a field trial and enjoy that and foster that love that you have and see where it takes you and see where it goes. We could do another podcast about your experiences, James, and the dogs you've seen and the people you've met and stuff. But I think you'd echo those same sentiments that just go to trials and get involved, right?
Yeah, don't expect to have success right away. I mean, it is something that it takes time to grow into, but it is very rewarding. It is something that when you do start to have success, will feel like it is well earned and like you really achieved something. And it's something that doesn't come easily. And the harder you work at it, the more you get back out of it. And the more you get involved, the more it's going to help the sport.
Couldn't say it any better. And in closing, I just wanted to say this. I record these episodes in my office just because I've got a lot of computer equipment and various things, and it's quiet here after hours and stuff. And I have a portion on my office wall it's kind of dedicated to my bird dog life, or what my wife calls my second love. And there's a picture on here of a Bluegrass Walking Shooting Dog Club open shooting dog stake winners photo. And I'll remember that day very well. Back in 2021, we had our stake there. We hosted it, and I'm looking at Tim Mulvaney. I was fortunate enough to win that stake. It was a pretty hefty stake, even by our walking standards in Berea. A lot of dogs were in that stake. Jerry Addison got second, I believe, with his Rose or Rosie dog. And there you are in the picture, good friend of ours, Scott Luther, with his dog. And there's just a lot said about a lot of smiling faces with dogs in a photo and all that stuff. And if I could tell anybody anything that field trials will give you, they're not always going to give you wins, and they're not always going to pay your bills and stuff like that. You can't expect that. And you can't get into this game thinking that will satisfy those requirements. But what you can be guaranteed of are memories and friendships. And these pictures on my walls of these winners' photos and stuff, everybody's smiling. Everybody that's got a dog up on the table who's won, to the people that just volunteered that day, they're all smiling because it's just been a great day out and a great day going forward. And James, I'm just so happy that you would join us and talk about the NBHA Sharptail Championship and a little bit about yourself and all your developments in the game. You're a great guy. You do a great job with the dogs that you have and your clientele, and you definitely do a great job with the Sharptail Championship, and we can't thank you enough. James, I want to give you a chance to plug yourself. If somebody wants to get in contact with you, if they want to find you, how do we find James Kleve?
The best way to get in touch with me is either call me or shoot me a text. My phone number is 651-304-7715. Love talking bird dogs, and anything I can ever do to try to help anyone or answer questions, I do my best to try to make time to have those conversations and make those phone calls. So anything I can ever do, I try to help on.
Well, James, you've been great for this podcast. You're great for our game, and I just want to thank you so much for coming on the Breakaway podcast. Thanks, James.
Hey, thank you, Joe.
That was the Breakaway podcast. Thank you so much for joining us. If you enjoyed the podcast, please tell a friend, like, and subscribe to all of our social media platforms to stay up to date on everything National Bird Hunters Association and all other field trial related content. But hopefully, we'll see you next time at the Breakaway.